So what happens to our resources once we're done with them? Well, we throw them away. But where they go after that, although maybe not a mystery, is a lot more regulated and complicated than you think. So we're going to explore a little bit about our waste and what happens to it next. So before talking about our waste here in the United States, I want to talk about just the resources used around the world. So this map shows some of the top resources that are used. For example, different fossil fuels such as oil. The United States is the #1 user of oil, followed by China. You also have coal and natural gas, which are other fossil fuels. Natural gas we use the most of as well, but when it comes to coal, that is predominantly China, although we use a lot of coal as well. There are other resources we use, such as corn. This corn isn't actually used so much for human consumption, but used for animal feed as well as biodiesel. The United States is also #1 user of electricity. In China, wheat is #1 as well as rice and even cotton. Now, although China is the predominant user of cotton, United States is one of the buyers of that cotton. So this is just kind of giving you an idea of which resources are used the most around the world. But something I really want to make a note of is first populations. China is the #1 population center of the world, followed very closely by India. Both of those countries have around 1.3 billion people. The United States has about 0.3 billion people, and we're #3, so we're the third most populous country. Now, why this matters is the fact that the United States is actually leading resource consumption in a lot of major resources, despite not having the most people. And this is something to keep in mind because that can kind of be scary. We use a lot of the world's resources, but we don't have the world's most people. In fact, we are way below the top 2 countries, and that kind of dictates the wastefulness of our country. All right, this image has a lot of information on it, and we're going to kind of break it down. This is looking at different resources and how long they will last if we keep using these resources at the current rate. So let me dissect this one in the middle. So for example, this bar right here represents gold. This first number, 36, this 36 means in about 36 years, if we keep using gold and extracting gold at the current rate, we have about 36 years before we run out. The second number, 45, says that if every single person in the world used half as much gold, in this case, half as much gold as what we use here in the United States, here's how much longer it would last. And in this case, it would last about 45 years, kind of showing this disparity of we in the United States use a lot of resources. And if we were, or if the rest of the world were to use even half of what we used, it could go much longer. Now these bars are kind of, they're not quite to scale, they're on a log scale, which is kind of a special scale. For example, here we have 510 years for aluminum, so quite a long time. Again, if the rest of the world used half of what we did, then it would last 1,000 years. So although that's a small bar, that actually is quite a long period of time. Point being, and the thing I would test you on, is that the United States is really the #1 consumer in a lot of different resources. If you look here on the left-hand side, this is looking at United States consumption of various resources. The #1 is phosphorus. You should know this. So #1 resource used is phosphorus. Why? Phosphorus is a major ingredient of fertilizer, and we use tons of fertilizer. But I'm not talking about your Miracle-Gro that you use on your front lawn. No, we're talking big industry agriculture scale. We're talking about all those food crops that we provide for people, all those food crops for our livestock. We use tons and tons of fertilizer. And a lot of the ingredient in fertilizer is phosphorus. The second most being aluminum. Aluminum we use in our automobiles, we use them in our electronics, we use them in a lot of different contexts. But you should know phosphorus is the one that we use the most of, mainly for agriculture, for people and livestock. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. Although we use a lot of things, we do recycle a lot. What you should know, number one resource we recycle is lead. And this is of these resources. So we actually recycle a lot of lead, which is really good. And same with our gold and aluminum as well. So don't think of this as, oh, we're really wasteful. At least we are reusing some things. But let's talk about us, the United States, us. What do we waste? How much do we throw away? In 2014, the EPA estimated that we threw away 258 million tons of waste. 258 million tons of waste. To me, that's just unfathomable. Now, this does, or I guess this includes recycling, composting. This is just anything that we use that we then put elsewhere. If we look at this on a per person basis, that's about 4.5 pounds of trash a person in the United States a day. So that's about 30 pounds of trash that each person in the United States creates a week. So you and me, we're part of the problem. That's a lot of trash per person. If you're in a household of 5 people in a single week, that is 150 pounds of garbage. But again, garbage and recycling and composting. But still, that's a lot of resources we're wasting. Of every single country in the world, this is the most. We create the most waste. Most waste per person, but also most waste generated by the world. And that's kind of sad that we're the third most populous country, but we create the most waste. And we're also supposed to be at the forefront of technology, but we're not. We're still very wasteful. But I will like to say that of this 258 million tons, about 35% of that is recycled. And you may think, wow, that's great. Like, that's pretty high. Yeah, sure. Let's take a look at this graph, though. This graph is kind of breaking down where those 258 million pounds went. Paper, paperboard, cardboard, 26%. All of that can be recycled. Maybe it's part of that 35%. Food, 15%. We can compost food, and that's considered in this recycling rate. All right, well, right there, we're at about 40%. Yard trimmings also can be composted. Wood also can be composted. Rubber, leather, and textiles, yeah, they can't really be recycled. Plastics, metals, glass, those can be recycled. So essentially every single thing on this graph except rubber, leather, and textiles can be recycled or be composted. So about 90% of our waste can be dealt with in a more environmentally friendly way, but it's not. Only 35%. So sure, 35 is good. 35 is actually better. It's better than what it used to be, but still nowhere close enough to where we need to be. This is still hundreds of millions of tons of trash not being recycled and not being composted. So when we throw away our trash, so I'm talking about trash specifically, not compost and not recycling, where does it go? And your automatic thinking is probably a landfill. And it does somewhat, but there's some steps in between. So the very first place your trash goes is to a transfer station. This, as the name implies, it's an area where trash is transferred. So you think about a dump truck. Dump truck holds a whole bunch of trash, but could you imagine enough dump trucks to carry 258 million tons of trash a year? It's not economical. That's a whole bunch of gasoline, that's a whole bunch of energy, a whole bunch of people working. If that trash was going from a dump truck to a landfill every single day. Instead, dump trucks will go to a transfer station, and from a transfer station, this trash will either go on a huge tractor trailer, which can hold multiple loads, or get loaded onto trains. And actually here in Montgomery County, that's what happens to our trash. Our trash gets loaded onto trains. The transfer station here in Montgomery County is in Shady Grove. It's the Shady Grove transfer station. Then it goes to a landfill. Here in Montgomery County, ours doesn't actually go to a landfill, but I'll talk about that more in a little bit. Now you may think of landfills as, oh, it's a hole in the ground and we put trash in it. But it's actually a lot more complicated than that. We actually have tons of different federal rules that regulate how a landfill is created, how it is treated, how it is maintained, both during the landfill days and post-landfill. Now, although there are federal rules, it's mainly the states or even the county level that's actually regulating it. They're the ones who are making sure that they're following the rules. So our landfill regulations, why do we even have them? Well, our trash is not good for the environment. Some of this stuff is fine, like in the environment, but some things that we get rid of can end up being pretty toxic. And you don't want that to get into our water supply. You don't want that in our soil. So we want to prevent, bad things happening to our environment, which could affect humans. And the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, is the federal agency that overlooks this. And they created this law called the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, or RCRA for short. And the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act has rules as to what a landfill needs to have. So for example, it has to be on a good land. And what I mean by that is it can't be on a wetland. Wetland has very soft soil, and wetlands are usually connected to a water resource that humans use as well as organisms. It also can't be near a fault line. So a fault line is where earthquakes commonly happen. If an earthquake goes off, that can actually ruin the integrity of the landfill and cause a pollution outbreak. Another rule, landfills are all the hole that they are in, there's actually 2 feet of clay as well as a really thick plastic liner that surrounds that landfill. So it's all down here. So again, 2 feet thick of clay and this plastic liner. And the reason for that is really just to prevent that trash as it breaks down and becomes grosser than it already is to prevent whatever liquids, solids, chemicals from leaching out of the trash and into the environment. As trash breaks down, it creates liquid. It also creates gas, usually natural gas. So there has to be a series of pipings, a series of tubes that will pump out liquid that comes from the bottom. That's what you see here. And then also pipes that you see along the top of this that collect gas, particularly methane gas. This methane gas is pretty explosive. In some areas around the world, including New York, they actually take the gas from a landfill and actually turn that into energy for homes. Some landfills, you can actually drive by them and you might see like a flame at the top because they're actually burning that gas. And then finally, they have to have monitoring systems. They'll have these poles near the side of the landfill, like you see here, all around it, essentially measuring, chemicals to see if there was a leak or anything in that landfill. So although landfills seem pretty simple, actually a lot more complicated, but in a good way. It's really to make sure that we are safe and that the environment is safe.